Thank you. What we defend is utilitarianism. We believe protection of 100,000 people in the planet is an objective value compared to subjectivity of ethics and morality, which are completely dependent on people, community, a specific age. Therefore, we are happy to prioritize the objective value as the protection of individuals. Especially in the context of scientific discovery, that's the most progressive part of our industry. It's the most front line of our industry. It's a very difficult area, but especially difficult areas for human beings to make any value judgment in the first place. Therefore, invoking ethics is the inherently antithetical or irrational criterion to consider the phenomenal value of scientific discovery. This is our strategy and stance. So I would like to introduce three arguments. Firstly, the context and overwhelming necessity of prioritizing discovery. Secondly, why ethics is a subjective and ambiguous criterion which undermines protection of human beings. Thirdly, the comparison. Before that, I would like to set up a debate. Two things. First of all, what kind of scenario are we talking about in this debate? We are talking about a scenario in which non-ethical conduct is the only solution to gain discovery. If there are both ethical solutions and non-ethical solutions available, that's not a debate. That's not a fair burden of proof for proposition. Secondly, there's a distinction between legal regulation and ethical regulation. For example, there are legal regulations. If the ethical research generates the actual tangible harm to individual, such as non-consented human experiment, all these kind of things are legally prosecuted, just like any other law is considered as a crime. But ethical regulation is different. Even though research do not generate any tangible harm to society, because of the ethical reasons, some research are blocked and prohibited, such as stem cell research, for example. Those are the kind of regulation we are trying to remove and talk about in this debate. Moving on to the argumentations about the context and necessity. So we are talking about a huge discovery in this debate. I'll take you now.
So legal regulation is usually backed by ethical regulation. Why can you say that there is a distinction between these two?
No, considering any other kinds of laws, a crime, for example, like actual tangible harm to individuals, actual tangible harm to somebody else, that is externally verifiable, just like any other crimes, and that's the distinction here. So moving to necessity and overwhelming necessity. So we are talking about huge discovery, not like moderate discovery, such as cracking down cancers, HIV/AIDS, malaria, or Ebola pandemic, or stem cell research. That level of research is what are we talking about in this debate. That is essential and critical for government to leverage to protect hundreds of thousands of people in the need. When this kind of discovery is found out, the pharmaceutical corporations or governments are able to access those researches so that they can spend a lot of money to develop the actual discovery and able to apply those things into the actual medicines or technologies to help people in the hospital and medical institutions. Under these circumstances, already we are compromising some level of ethics, such as clinical testing. Individuals are already up to in clinical testing process in order to judge the risk of new medicines under development, ladies and gentlemen. We are happy to extend this current framework of developing pharmaceutical discovery and scientific discovery into the area of many other huge discoveries. Then, why ethics is an illegitimate criterion? Many reasons for that. Number one, the definition of ethics is usually monopolized by the limited number of scientists in the community. Ladies and gentlemen, the ways in which the scientist community define the ethics is not democratic at all. Not many people are participating in that. There are authoritative professors in universities or industries are able to access and be eligible and enter that kind of committee to make a judgment about what we call ethics. Oftentimes there's a malfeasance between the regime and that kind of committees. The members of the committees are elected by the president, for example, or the regime at that point of time. Therefore, the rich and elitisms are able to define and determine the judgment and the definition of ethics. That is not representing democratic value at all. Therefore, the standard of ethics is in the first place questionable. No, thank you. Secondly, the definition of ethics is not subject to democratic debate and discussion. Oftentimes, that is not accountable and even manipulated. Because if the politicians are funded by Christian organization, it's very difficult for that kind of candidates and politicians to talk about critiques against stem cell research during the electoral time. Therefore, voters are systematically forced and coerced to access limited number of information sources during the electoral terms in the democratic process. Therefore, the definition and discussions about specific technologies are sometimes concealed or sometimes manipulated by the authority and privileged individuals in the process. No, thank you. Finally, outdated values. Oftentimes, ethics values are strongly connected with religious values or any other subjective value which is hard to prove, or metaphysical values. The reason why stem cell research was prohibited or prevented by United States of America is because it happened to be United States of America. The vast majority of people were Christian, for example. Therefore, these kind of subjective values, which are rationale of ethics, are inherently antithetical to value judgment of the most progressive part of scientific phenomenon in our society. There is no universal value judgments in our ethics in the first place. For example, let's take a look at the history. There are many discoveries that changed the social norm in the first place. For example, Copernicus' discovery. Many people believed that the Earth was the center of the universe, but that was the opposite. The Earth was round and moving. Other example was Darwinism and evolutionism. Many Christian people used to oppose a specific discovery. Therefore, these examples and precedents exemplify that the scientific discovery itself will change the social norm, change the value judgment, change the definition of ethics in the first place. So in order to have this kind of discussions about what constitutes ethics, what constitutes morality, discovery is necessary, or these kind of data are necessary so that we can enable public to talk about the value judgment. Finally, about the comparison, we accept there are many risks and backlash if we take this proposal. But ladies and gentlemen, final judgment should be up to the hands of the public, hands of society. Society and the public have a right to determine what to do about it, what kind of policy to support eventually. Scientists are not in position to make that kind of judgments about morality and the future of the discovery. Scientists are scientists, not the politicians, not the public. It's unfair for the scientists to prevent individuals, the public, from exercising the right to determine their futures about what to do with the scientific discovery, whether to prioritize protection of hundreds of thousands of people or animals' welfare, for example. That kind of moral judgment should be up to public decisions eventually. We are happy to propose. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the Prime Minister for the remarks. I'd like to call upon the Leader of the Opposition to open the case for side opposition in 7 minutes. Here.